Welcome back to Overnight Accountants course, Realtors and Reducing Taxes. We're preparing to wrap up expenses on Schedule C. Last two lines on Schedule C, other than other expenses, are going to be utilities, line 25, and wages, line 26, which we'll discuss both in this very, very brief section. Utilities, now this is going to be rare, that's why we're going to be very briefly covered, because most of you folks have a home office. Hopefully you have a home office to maximize that auto expense. However, if you do have an office that you rent or own that is completely separate from your home and not on your own property, this section would apply to you. However, remember, if you have a home office, those expenses, including utilities, are reported on Form 8829, Business Use of the Home, and that is a separate course section in this course. As you recall, it's far earlier in the course. If you have a separate office, however, you can include water and sewer. Now, bottled water, however, would be considered an office expense, as we discussed earlier. It would also include heat. That could be gas, propane, and oil, the expenses that you have for heat there. Electricity, trash removal will be another utilities expense. Only include utilities for your business. So that's why if you have a home office, or if it's used only partially for business, if it's used for something else, both personal and business, remember you can only take the business use percentage, assuming we're talking about an office separate from your home again. Now, telephone and cell phone, oftentimes the telephone is referred to as utility. However, a telephone, even a landline, is really reported on your tax return as an other expense, and we'll discuss both those in a section very soon to come up. Now, also remember that your first phone line I just threw this in here, that is really not deductible as utilities, really not deductible at all. So first landline coming in your house is generally not deductible as a business expense. So moving forward, wages, line 26. Very briefly discuss wages. Make sure we cover every line on your tax return. It's going to be rare because most of you folks aren't going to have any employees. Now, some brokers will, a lot of brokers will, but usually if they do have employees, that's going to be somebody that's a non-licensed agent or an agent that is not paid on commission, that is really paid a salary. Your most common employee, however, for most of you is going to be a secretary or other folks you have in there doing more administrative work for you as employees. So larger brokers may have a few employees. However, this really is not a course for brokers. It's primarily for real estate agents. It's going to be very rare for most of you. Now, it's not covered really in this course in depth. It generally could be, but however, generally the amount reported would be usually equal to the amount reported in box 1 of all the W-2s for your employees will be the amount included in this line. Now, I do want you to be aware if you have contractors, we discussed this in detail under the contract labor expense. However, if you direct and pay these individuals by the hour, the more control you have on them. If you treat them as an employee, the basic rules, they may actually be employees. So be very careful if you do have employees. Make sure you're not treating them as contractors. They may be employees under common law. And really, when we discuss box 11, contract labor, we really discuss that in detail. Also, you may want to check the course. If you really have questions about this, we probably have some articles on overnightaccountant.com. We may even have a separate course. We don't right now, but it is in the pipeline to have a course on contract labor versus employees. So that's it for this section. You may have noticed it was the shortest section so far in the course. Now our next two sections we're going to be covering other expenses, and there's basically items that aren't reported on any other line on your Schedule C.